In the summer of 1978, a young woman named Judy Ulrich was driving down a rural highway in Indiana. She was 18 years old. Her sisters were in the car. They were rear-ended at low speed, the kind of collision people walk away from every single day. They didn't walk away. The fuel tank of their Ford Pinto ruptured on impact. The car erupted in flames within seconds. All three sisters died. What made this tragedy different from thousands of others was what came next. Because investigators, lawyers, and eventually the entire American public would discover something that should have been impossible. Ford Motor Company had known. They had run the numbers. They had weighed the cost of fixing the problem against the cost of the lawsuits that would follow the deaths. And they had chosen the lawsuits. This is the story of the Ford Pinto, a car that became a symbol, not of innovation, not of freedom, but of corporate calculation at its most brutal. To understand how the Pinto happened, you have to understand where Ford was in 1968. The American auto industry was being challenged for the first time in its history. Volkswagen's Beetle was selling in enormous numbers across the United States. Small, cheap, fuel-efficient. Everything Detroit had always ignored. And then came the Japanese, Toyota, Datsun, compact cars that American consumers were suddenly buying in large numbers. Ford's leadership was watching market share disappear. And one man in particular was furious about it. Lee Iacocca. Iacocca was Ford's vice president at the time, aggressive, ambitious, and obsessed with results. He issued a challenge that would define the entire Pinto project. The new car had to weigh no more than 2,000 pounds, and it had to cost no more than $2,000. The so-called 2000-2000 rule. And it had to be on the market in just 25 months. For context, the average American car development cycle at the time was 43 months. Ford was cutting that nearly in half. That decision, that timeline, would have consequences that no one officially wanted to admit they had anticipated. Engineers at Ford moved fast, faster than they ever had before. Designs were approved, revised, and approved again in weeks rather than months. And somewhere in that process, a critical decision was made about the fuel tank. On most cars, the fuel tank sits above the rear axle, protected, tucked away from impact zones. On the Pinto, to save space and keep costs down, the tank was placed behind the rear axle, just 6 inches from the rear bumper. In a rear-end collision, even at relatively low speed, the tank could be punctured by the differential bolts, metal protrusions on the axle housing that sat directly in its path. A spark, a leak, and within seconds, fire. Ford's own crash tests confirmed the problem. Internal tests showed that at impacts as low as 25 miles per hour, the tank was vulnerable to rupture. There was a fix. Engineers proposed several options: a rubber bladder lining the tank, a plastic shield, repositioning the tank above the axle. The cheapest solution would have cost approximately $11 per car. $11. Ford weighed that cost against something else entirely. They weighed it against what they expected to pay in court. In 1973, Ford submitted a cost-benefit analysis to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. It was a routine regulatory document, except for what it contained. Inside, Ford's analysts had assigned a monetary value to human life. Using government figures that were themselves part of standard regulatory practice at the time, Ford calculated that each traffic fatality was worth approximately $200,000 in liability costs. Each serious injury around $67,000. They then calculated the total cost of upgrading the Pinto's fuel system across all vehicles and light trucks, around $130 million. The cost of projected deaths and injuries without the fix, around $49 million. The math was simple. Fixing the car cost more than paying for the consequences of not fixing it. So they didn't fix it. When this document became public during the lawsuits that followed, when journalists got hold of what became known simply as the Pinto Memo, the reaction was unlike anything the American auto industry had experienced before. Because this wasn't negligence in the traditional sense. This wasn't a mistake, an oversight, an engineering failure that slipped through the cracks. This was a decision. Documented, filed, approved. The lawsuits came quickly. In 1977, journalist Mark Dowie published an explosive investigation in Mother Jones magazine. The piece revealed Ford's internal testing, the $11 fix, and the cost-benefit analysis. It was read by millions. The following year, the year Judy Ulrich and her sisters died in Indiana, Ford faced a criminal prosecution. For the first time in American history, a major corporation was charged with reckless homicide. The trial lasted over 4 months. Ford was ultimately acquitted on the criminal charges. The prosecution struggled to prove that Ford's executives had direct, conscious knowledge of the specific danger at the time of the accident. But the civil cases were different. Juries across the country awarded massive damages to victims and their families. In one landmark case, a California jury awarded $125 million in punitive damages alone. Later reduced on appeal, but the message was impossible to ignore. Ford recalled 1.5 million Pintos in 1978. The fix that had been deemed too expensive? It cost $11 per vehicle. The Pinto was discontinued in 1980. It had been on the market for less than a decade. The Ford Pinto case changed American corporate law permanently. It accelerated federal safety regulations. It established that internal cost-benefit analyses, when they demonstrated conscious disregard for human life, could be used as evidence of malice in civil proceedings. It also changed how we talk about corporate accountability. Because before the Pinto, most people assumed that large companies made dangerous decisions by accident, by oversight, through ignorance. The Pinto proved that wasn't always true. Sometimes the decision is made in a conference room, typed into a memo, filed in a cabinet, and somewhere on a highway, someone pays the price. The $2,000 car, the $11 fix, the $49 million calculation, and 3 sisters on a road in Indiana who never made it home. If this story stayed with you, a like takes 2 seconds, and it helps more people find it. See you in the next one.